This is a podcast by the News Minute, and you are listening to South Central.
Hello and welcome to South Central, a TNM podcast where we put the South at the center. I am Dhanya Rajendran, your host. Today we'll discuss the Pahalgam attack, India's reactions, and what's the way forward for the country. The World Press Freedom Index is out. India has done marginally better, so we'll look at why the number is better and what the ground reality is. Along with me is Pooja Prasanna, my co-host and the anchor of Let Me Explain.
Hello from a very rainy, cold Bengaluru today.
It's a surprise, but
yeah,
it has been quite hot all these days. And in the studio, sitting all alone, is Leena Reghunath, formerly with the Caravan, investigative journalist. Leena, welcome.
Thank you, Dhanya. Happy to be here.
Joining us from Chennai is Nirupama Subramaniam. She is a journalist who's worked for almost 4 decades, mostly with the Indian Express and the Hindu. She's now an independent columnist who writes for many publications, including the Tribune, Deccan Herald, and Newslaundry. Nirupama is a familiar name for people who have been reading newspapers. She's reported from Pakistan, from Sri Lanka, and she's also the author of 2 books, Voices from a War Zone and Murder on the Menu. For South Indians who are watching this, in fact, everyone should read the book Murder on the Menu. Have you read it? No, it's on the Sharavana Bhavan owner murdering a woman and then getting caught for it. Nirupama, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dhanya, for having me on this podcast. And thank you also for recommending my book.
Yeah, I read the book in one go, in one sitting. It's really, it's one of those books which also tell you the struggles that people have to go through to ensure that someone very powerful is actually punished for their crime. This podcast will air on the 2nd of May, by which time the RSF World Press Freedom Index would be out. India has done marginally better in the World Press Freedom Index. Not so much, but just marginally better. Last time, RSF had said that the Indian media is in an unofficial state of emergency ever since Narendra Modi came to power in 2014. Now, you may wonder, isn't this an exaggeration? Aren't media in India really reporting negatively about the government? They're always saying things about Narendra Modi. Actually, that's not true. They aren't. A large section of the media does no critical reporting. So there's direct and indirect coercion, there is constant intimidation, and there is also pure subservience. One thing which RSF has noted over the years is the problem with ownership in Indian media. Like, for example, billionaire Mukesh Ambani is supposed to be owning around 70 media outlets in the country. So ownership is a huge problem in India, and because of ownership, there is self-censorship. And like I keep telling you every single week, the News Minute is not owned by any corporate group or any political party. These are tough times for all media, especially for media like ours. And the point that we try to drive in week on week by saying become a subscriber is because if you value editorial freedom, then it helps us if you fund our journalism and if you become a subscriber. So the QR code is there if you're from outside India. And I'm quite happy there are a lot of South Central listeners now from outside India. You can click on the link which is in the description.
Dhanya, may I interrupt you there, since you said that TNM is independent? Wasn't TNM, according to a Caravan story, offered a big sum, that is you, when you started out, by one of the big corporate businessmen to buy it out? And how did that play out for you?
Obviously, he didn't buy it out. Yeah, Caravan had reported this. But let's not tell people who that politician is or that corporate person is. Let them go subscribe to Caravan, read all the media editions, and then you will see the mention of this, how we had an offer to be sold out.
I want to know what people think. You can actually post your guesses in the comment section.
Like, who's the politician?
Yes.
Yeah, who tried to buy us out?
But can you imagine what would have happened had he bought out? Like, we wouldn't have a podcast like this sitting here and talking about the things that we have.
So, of course, yeah. So write to us at southcentral@thenewsminute.com. Tell me what you think of the podcast. And of course, like Pooja said, who do you think tried to buy us out? And it's also 100 editions of Power Trip, our political newsletter. 2 years ago, Pooja, Shabir and I thought, what can we give our subscribers with our experience of being political reporters? Our idea was to start a newsletter called Power Trip, which should not be idle chatter or gossip, but it should actually tell you what is happening in the corridors of power. So for 100 editions, we have given you information. In fact, Yesterday's one has about the BBC's response to what the Indian government has said for the fact that they don't use the word terrorist and why we think the situation is going to escalate. So become a subscriber, get Power Trip every Tuesday in your inbox.
Also, Dhanya, I don't know if you've noticed, it is the 25th edition of this podcast, South Central.
Yeah.
We keep thinking it's brand new, but it's been 25 weeks since we started doing this. We've discussed everything from politics to movies to sports. So do go back and listen to the older episodes if any of the topics interest you. And we may just put it behind paywall sometime in the future. So become a subscriber now so you can get access in the future too.
We go to the headlines now.
First, this is news that's just come in. Union Cabinet approves caste census in the upcoming population census. The Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs has cleared caste enumeration in the upcoming national census. Now, as I say upcoming, I don't know when that will actually happen. Probably in 2026, but we don't know for sure. But I wonder what kind of spin they'll give to make it not seem like this is Rahul Gandhi's idea that the government finally accepted because he's been talking about it forever.
No, it is definitely going to be seen as Rahul Gandhi's impact, no matter how the BJP covers it. Because remember, during the election, Narendra Modi actually said that there are only 4 castes in India: the poor, youth, women, and I forgot the last one. So he said those are the only castes which matter. And later he also said that, talking about the caste census indirectly, he said that for some people, talking about caste is a fashion. So to really not make it look like Rahul Gandhi's achievement would be very tough for the BJP.
Yeah, just a last point here. I had covered this in one episode of Let Me Explain why caste survey is important, because a lot of people think, why do we have to keep talking about caste forever? It will actually give an indication of not just the numbers, not just who belongs to which caste, but where they stand socially, economically, where they stand, educational background. So this will also help us frame our policies much better. Well-executed master plan enabling scientific corruption, says Madras High Court on cash for job scam. This is something we've covered quite a bit. Shabir has done an investigation, but this is a landmark observation, right, Dhanya? This is extremely
This is
significant.
Senthil Balaji, the minister who just had to step down because the Supreme Court offered him it's either jail or no ministership. He resigned, but now the Madras High Court has said that this was a very well-oiled scam. I mean, I feel that's something that we lose focus on, right? Yes, there is a question of federalism, the use of ED by BJP, etc. But we cannot forget that there was a scam and there were people who were victims of that scam. And in all the din, we should not forget that.
Yeah. Karnataka High Court stays ED's money laundering case against Amnesty India and Akar Patel. The court has directed the Enforcement Directorate not to proceed further under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act until the next hearing. Amnesty, of course, had denied all allegations of money laundering, and they said that the way they raise money is lawful and all the allegations are politically motivated.
It's a huge
Yes.
relief.
And this will have ripple effects also, right?
Of
Because
course.
so many people have been targeted because of this. So I hope all of them get relief. Mangaluru mob lynching, 36-year-old Kerala man identified as victim. 20 people so far have been arrested. The lynching victim has been identified as 36-year-old Ashraf, who's a native who hails from Sultan Bathery Taluk of Wayanad district in Kerala. The incident is from April 28th, where he was beaten to death by a mob in Mangaluru. This is really, really very alarming.
So it happened during a local cricket match, and the people around said that he said a pro-Pakistan slogan, but the SP saying we are not very sure. One man called Sachin started beating this guy up, and then they lynched him. What I find very disturbing is that when the story has gotten reported, first his body was unidentified. They thought he must be a migrant laborer from Bihar or Madhya Pradesh or one of the northern states. But yesterday, when the body was identified and the newspapers and everybody started reporting on it, below in the comment section, you can see so many people saying he deserved it. So what's the big deal? He should not have said pro-Pakistani slogans now. And I think one of the newspapers today, I don't know whether it's the Express or the Times of India, but a lot of people have been tweeting. It has got an entire layout of attacks on Muslims and Kashmiris across India for different reasons, right? Either students are attacked, there is economic boycott. I mean, we are setting an example for the terrorists really. If they wanted us to be separated, we are like, yeah, come on, we will do it for you.
Pushpa to stampede 5 months after injury, 8-year-old taken off respiratory support. As of April 30th, 2025, Shri Teja has been taken off the respiratory support nearly after 5 months. This was a stampede that took place on December 4th at Sandhya Theatre in Hyderabad.
But he's not discharged. He has been admitted for neuro rehab. So that means that child will have to go through a lot of therapy.
Yeah. 7 devotees killed in wall collapse in Simhachalam temple in Andhra Pradesh. This happened on April 30th during the Chandanotsavam festival. The wall had been newly constructed, nearly 300, and it happened near the 300 rupee ticket counter. And it collapsed around 3:15 a.m. This is early in the morning.
The country is still reeling under the shock of the terrorist attack in Pahalgam, where 26 tourists were gunned down by terrorists. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, according to many reports, has said that the mode, timing and targets of the response will be left to the discretion of India's armed forces. In the aftermath, a lot of high-level meetings have been convened. India has, of course, said from the beginning itself, as the first reaction, that 5 steps will be taken, including keeping the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. A lot has been discussed about all these topics, but we will take it a bit forward by looking at what can India really do? Can India afford a war? And we'll also look at the attacks on Kashmiris, especially Kashmiri students across the country. We have one more guest joining us. It is Professor Amitabh Mattoo. Professor Mattoo is the Dean and Professor of the School of International Studies in JNU. He holds posts in the Indian Association of International Studies, the Board of Australia-India Institute, Central University of Jammu and Kashmir, Miranda House and the University of Melbourne. Amitabh Mattoo is also a former Vice Chancellor of the University of Jammu. He has been a cabinet-ranked advisor to the Chief Minister of Jammu Kashmir and a member of the Advisory Board of India's National Security Council. Welcome, Mr. Mattoo, to South Central.
A pleasure coming on your program. I've heard a lot about your program, so I'm delighted to be here today.
Thank you. I'll just start with first comments from you and then Nirupama. India has, of course, announced a series of measures, the first being the Indus Water Treaty being kept in abeyance, and we have seen reactions from Pakistan. Now, there is talk that there will be military escalation because the Prime Minister has met the Chief of the Armed Forces. How do you look at India's reaction still now?
I think at the moment it's very calibrated. It's measured almost. Given the angst and anger within public opinion in India, and given that you have a strong Prime Minister and a political establishment which is seen as being hawkish on matters related to security and defense, so far the reaction has been rather muted in some ways. Of course, there has been a slate of measures announced, including keeping the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, which is probably the most significant. The others are really symbolic, like reducing the number of staff within the High Commission or declaring the defense attaches persona non grata or closing the Attari-Wagah border. I think these are more symbolic measures designed to assuage the immediate sense of anger. The Indus Water Treaty in abeyance is also more symbolic at the moment. Of course, it has the potential as for India as an upper riparian state to deeply damage Pakistan's primarily agriculture-based economy. We have to now wait and see, as you pointed out, that the armed forces chiefs have met the Prime Minister. You have had meetings of the Cabinet Committee on Security. So what these translate into? When he spoke from Bihar, the Prime Minister said that no measure will be, every measure will be undertaken to actually bring the perpetrators and their backers, and that we pursue them, and I am paraphrasing these words, to the end of the earth, if need be. Those are strong words. Now, I think the Indian public, which is used to seeing Prime Minister Modi act very decisively, is waiting for that action to happen. I have no doubt at the moment, unless things change dramatically, that we will see some use of force, covert as well as potentially overt use of force. What will be Pakistan's response will then determine the degree to which this will escalate. So at the moment, as I said, despite the fact that you have had the United States, Russia, the UN Secretary General calling for India and Pakistan to exercise restraint, at the moment, the mood of the country is such, and given that the credibility of the establishment is at stake, that if I was a betting person, which I am not, I would certainly say that the odds are hugely in favor of military action.
Right. Nirupama, I want to ask you what kind of action do you see, not just militarily, but even otherwise? Because in the past, after Balakot, after Pulwama, this government is seen as somebody, they need to be seen as doing stuff. They're caught in their own web of theatrics, right? Is that sometimes a deterrent? And my second question, do you see that playing out differently this time?
So, one of the things that is apparent now, with how slowly and in a calibrated fashion they're moving, is because of the experience that they've had both after Uri in 2016 and after Balakot in 2019. We saw some responses by the government on both those occasions, and they did not really yield the kind of objective that they had after both those actions. On both those occasions, the government rose up and said, we carried out these actions, and now terrorism will end. We have taught Pakistan a lesson. But that did not happen. This thing has taken place, and many other incidents have taken place. After 2016, you had 2019, and after 2019, although there's been a complete security clampdown in Kashmir, and you've seen a lot of attacks in Kashmir and in Jammu, right? So at this point, I think the government realizes that they really have to think out their next response. They've taken as Professor Mattoo said, they've taken the first measure of keeping the Indus Water Treaty in abeyance, which is, I think, something it was easy to do because they were already contemplating this. There had been noises from the government that they want to have this treaty reviewed, that they are getting an unfair deal from this treaty. So there was already plenty of indication that the government wanted a rethink on this treaty. I mean, right from 2016, Prime Minister Modi has questioned this treaty, as it were, which is supposed to be, by the way, a model treaty between any two countries in the world for water sharing. It is supposed to have been so painstakingly arrived at with no politicians in it at all, only arrived at with the help of engineers from both sides and with the World Bank's help. So that is one response. But I think people have come to know now that the water is not going to stop immediately. Earlier, there was this theory that water stopped. Now Pakistan will get no water. But I think the message has gone down that the water flow cannot be stopped. Unless you have these big dams and, somehow build pondage and everything, you can't stop the water. Now, people want something more. They want the Prime Minister to keep that promise of a 56-inch chest, and they want him to do something so strong. They, in fact, want India to act like Israel did after the Hamas attack. And this is something that is coming out very strongly. At that, you saw that a lot of Indians at that time it was not their war. What is happening in Israel and Gaza was really not their war. But a lot of Indians came out in support of Israel on social media. This is how it should be. And, you're doing the right thing. We back you. We are with you. And India, I think, was the only country that did not see the kind of support for Palestinians, which you saw in the rest of the world. So right now, the demand is, the very strong demand coming out on social media and everywhere else is that Pakistan should do, that India should do, and Israel. Question is, who is Hamas in this? What is Gaza? Is it Pakistan or is it Kashmir? And what do people actually want? As Professor Mattoo says, there will be it looks very possible that there's going to be some military escalation. What form it will take, one does not know. And people are saying there'll be a war, but if there is a war, it has to have an objective. What is that objective? It has to have a political objective. Is it going to be to, as people in government have been saying, Mr. Jaishankar, Mr. Rajnath Singh, even Prime Minister Modi, that we'll take back Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or is it to what is it? What is this objective? And if it is a covert objective, what might that be? Is it going to be to take on some targets I mean, one doesn't know, and I don't want to speculate even about those, because they sound dangerous. They sound potentially escalatory. We also have to remember that Pakistan, again, is not Gaza, Pakistanis are not, completely helpless in how they will retaliate. They have nuclear weapons, and so any escalation should also take that into account. That once it begins, the control, you don't really, the person who starts it does not really have control on how it goes, where it goes from there. And we saw that in Balakot, that after the missile strike in Balakot, we had a response from the Pakistanis in which we lost an aircraft and one pilot was taken prisoner of war, and the US had to intervene to have him released.
No, I just want to go back to the Indus Water Treaty, because both Professor Mattoo and you were mentioning that. To Professor Mattoo, so every interview we've all watched or read or analysis, everybody says that the impact of this keeping this treaty in abeyance is not going to be immediate, right? Though the Jal Shakti minister said that yes, water will be stopped and all that, it's now known that that's not going to happen. Then what was the point? I mean, the immediate point is that India will stop sharing hydrological data with Pakistan, which will definitely have implications. We don't have to share data with any of the engineers if they have infrastructural constructions. All that is fine. But I was listening to an interview in which Sharad Sabharwal, who's a former High Commissioner to Pakistan, was saying that it's a psychological move. Do you believe so? Because some of the most acute reactions also have come from Pakistan to the Indus Water Treaty being kept in abeyance, including Bilawal Bhutto saying that blood will flow through. So do you believe that it was a psychological move by the government?
First of all, I would like to take issues with Nirupama only on a small point. She's conflating jingoistic marginal opinion with mainstream thought, and also considers strategic opinion. I think within that spectrum, from considered strategic opinion and marginal extremist voices, the consensus is that you should do something. And more than the political objective, what is clear is that the military objective is to ensure that the Pakistani army, which is the main instrument of using and exporting terror, which is the main backer, has to pay a cost. After all, how do you deter the Pakistani army, if you begin with that assumption that the Pakistani army is planning all these attacks, is training all the cadre and sending them across with a definite objective to destabilize India, then what is the way in which that they will start paying costs? How will it start hurting the Pakistani army, which is in some ways almost a state within a state? In fact, people often joke that other states have an army. In this case, the Pakistani army owns the state. So how do you ensure that there is real cost that it has to pay? Now, the Indus Water Treaty is interesting. First of all, by at least saying that you're going to hold the treaty in abeyance, you crossed what you might say is a proverbial red line or a Lakshman Rekha, which is that essentially say that we are going to use water so critics might say weaponize water, but also that all our gloves are off. The idea that somehow this treaty, because it survived through all these years and because it was seen as a model treaty, was going to remain sacred and outside the calculus of security makers or calculus of war makers or people who are planning attacks on Pakistan. That's over. The fact of the matter also remains, just because the treaty has worked for all these years, which is 65 years, doesn't mean it's a model treaty. In some ways, you could argue that the only reason why this has worked so well is because India, as an upper riparian state, has actually borne all the costs of ensuring that the treaty works. You have been model guardians of this treaty by allowing waters of these rivers and tributaries of the Indus to flow and not constructed, in violation of the treaty, any large hydroelectric dams apart from the run-of-the-river projects which were constructed and which Pakistan objected to, but you agreed to the conflict resolution mechanism within the treaty. So as an upper riparian state, you have actually, in fact, deprived Jammu and Kashmir people of Jammu and Kashmir of the benefits of the only rivers that flow through Jammu. One of the greatest opponents of this treaty was Umar Abdullah himself and several Kashmiris who talk about the fact that you partition those rivers in a manner in which Punjab or Eastern Punjab gained the benefit of the Ravi, Bias and Satluj, while the people of Kashmir were denied the benefits of Jhelum, Chenab and the Indus, which flow through the valley and Jammu. So psychologically, of course, it's important, but even substantively, not sharing data, the pre-monsoon data, or even in some ways, perhaps not opening the gates or closing the gates and ensuring that there's limited flow during the dry and period could impact on the Rabi crop. Some of the Rabi crop is going to be sowed in April, May. And if you actually reduce the amount of water that you're going to let flow into Pakistan without causing floods at home, it will have an impact on the agriculture of the Punjab. 70 to 80% of Punjab depends on agriculture today. So while you might think that in an immediate sense, it's symbolic and psychological, even in the medium term, which is medium term defined as in the next 8 to 10 weeks, this could begin to have an impact. And if you don't share data, that itself can also prevent any kind of planning that agricultural planners or other scientists, agriculture scientists, may need to ensure that the farmers get access to the kind of seeds that they need to plant. So it's not purely symbolic. And as I said, I am cynical about this fact that just because this treaty was negotiated several decades ago and because the World Bank helped to negotiate the treaty, it's such a fantastic treaty. In fact, India and many Indians have always argued that it's given the nature of technological changes, given the fact that Pakistan cannot even make use of the water that flow into Pakistan, you should renegotiate the treaty in a manner in which the waters are not partitioned, the rivers are not partitioned, but that the waters of the rivers of the Indus Basin are optimally used given the new technology, given the fact that you can even construct, if there was peace ever between India and Pakistan, joint reservoirs, joint multi projects like the Bakra Nangal. But that's, of course, a different story. So the treaty, as far as I'm concerned, is neither modern, needs to be revised. Secondly, it survived only because India has been a generous upper riparian state. Now, there are people who argue, the Chinese could, as the upper riparian state, as far as India is concerned, could use the waters of the Brahmaputra then to as an instrument of their foreign policy or their instrument of their aggressive policy towards India. But that's a separate issue. You can discuss that threadbare. But as far as Indus Water Treaty, let's not kid ourselves. If Pakistan had been the upper riparian state, the story could well have been very different.
I just want to say something here. Can I just add something here about the Indus Water Treaty. The one thing that is important about the treaty is that it is a treaty which two countries have entered into. So there is a sovereign guarantee about a treaty like this. And what is the reputational cost of, keeping it in abeyance is not abrogating the treaty, but it suggests that India might do that. But what is the reputational cost of doing something like this to a treaty that carries a sovereign guarantee is something I think that has to be considered. There are other treaties that India has signed with other countries, and if another country is going to be, expresses unhappiness for the way in which that treaty is going. For instance, I can immediately think of Sri Lanka and the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord, which has several clauses which are now even in the present day, they are important. What if Sri Lanka someday says that, we abrogate, we are putting this Indo-Sri Lanka Accord in abeyance, which should mean that whole 13th Amendment, which we talk about when we talk about Sri Lanka and the Tamils, gets put in abeyance, or the Trincomalee oil farms and the joint development by India and Sri Lanka, which that treaty entails, is also put in abeyance. So there is, I think, a reputational cost that India must consider, and it can't be just thrown out of the window. And the other thing that Professor Mattoo said about China is not an academic thing. We do have relations with China that are not good. We do know that there is a collusion of interests between in Pakistan and China, and what we do to Pakistan may well be set off by what China may do to us. I think that is the whole nightmare of this two-front war, isn't it? I mean, when we talk about it in terms of war, but war by other means is also possible.
First of all, in response to your comment about the reputational damage, perhaps in an ideal world, these reputations matter, but these can't supersede national interest. Under Article 61 of the Vienna Convention, if the circumstances change, and circumstances change so dramatically, you can pull out of treaties, even though there isn't an exit clause within the treaty itself. Remember, when India had agreed to a plebiscite being conducted by the UN Security Council in Kashmir, but then the Jammu and Kashmir Constituent Assembly itself was carried out what was virtually a referendum, and most people of Jammu and Kashmir decided that they reaffirmed the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India. Again, India used the doctrine of rabis sic stantibus, which is that if there are circumstances which alter dramatically, there at that point of time, you can actually withdraw from any prior commitment that you have made. Similarly, with the Indus Water Treaty, the circumstances have changed dramatically. And also the fact that the bogey of a Chinese threat and the fact of a collusion should not prevent you from exercising options to deal with the present and real danger, which is Pakistan. This is not the Pakistan that Jinnah had thought of as modern, Muslim, and a state which will be moderate. This is a Pakistan which is a Frankenstein's monster. What I agree with you, however, is, and if you said that in the beginning, I think you said that the forces that might be unleashed because if Pakistan begins to unravel is something that we have not thought of. As Parvez Hoodboy often used to say, that India will realize too late that it has created a nuclear Somalia as its neighbors. Fractured, at deep war with itself, and with nuclear weapons to add, it is a dangerous Pakistan. So Pakistan is not today just an Indian problem, it's a problem of the world. And it's better if the international community, if we can, in this Trump age, describe anything as an international community, needs to take cognizance of the fact that you have a situation which obtains in Pakistan where Baluchistan is up in flames. And I don't for a second believe that India can actually engineer a rebellion in Baluchistan if there were no grievances in Baluchistan, or if the Tehreek-e-Taliban, if Pakistan is doing what it is doing in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and the fact that the Taliban themselves want to disconnect from Pakistan, in a situation like this, I think it's important for not just the West, but China also to realize that you might be unleashing a monster which will come and actually then begin to cause instability even in the Chinese Xinjiang area, where the Uyghurs who have been radicalized often by training camps within Pakistan. So I'm not being alarmist, but I'm trying to also suggest that the moderate opinion like myself, which has never seen itself as jingoistic, and which is far from being part of the marginal extremist voices that Nirupama just described so well and so colorfully in her opening address. I'm not part of that. I am part of a mainstream constituency which is not just dealing emotionally with what happened in Pahalgam, but rationally believes that you need to start imposing costs on Pakistan's army. Otherwise, the danger will extend much beyond Jammu and Kashmir.
But if I could just dive in here, Professor Mattoo, the question that many Indians today are asking, and we don't pretend to be experts in military operations, despite so many overt operations, and I presume there are a sequences of covert operations that go on that people like us are not aware of. Why does nothing ever deter Pakistan from carrying out, supporting these kind of attacks?
Very absolutely brilliant question, and I'm sure that is the question that has preoccupied every strategic planner within the Indian establishment, security establishment, including the intelligence agencies like RANW and the Foreign Office and the Indian Armed Forces. What will it take for Pakistan to stop exporting terror? Will it mean hurting the Pakistan within these provinces? Will it mean actually attacking Pakistan's armed forces directly? What is it? Is it a hurt which in some ways that Pakistan's elite begin to feel when a country is collapsing? That's when they will actually feel the heat and smell the coffee and then decide that we need to do a U-turn. Moments like this have happened. General Bajwa, who was the predecessor of General Munir, actually realized this. In all candor, he actually addressed his corps commanders and said, look, we are not capable of fighting a war. Now, Bajwa was a sensible, pragmatic general who was responsible for also the ceasefire which had held so far on the LOC. And he tried to actually tell the Pakistanis and the Pakistani elite and the armed forces, the corps commanders, that look, this is the writing on the wall. We cannot sustain a war. Our economy is collapsing. I don't even have the diesel to fill my tanks. But unfortunately, the backlash from the right wing was such, including many of Nirupama's friends on television, that he could not sustain that narrative. And ultimately, what replaced him was this absolute, for want of a better word, madcap general.
I also want to reiterate this question that Nirupama herself has posed, Professor Mattoo, that what is this war going to achieve at the end? And is it a war that this region needs at this point? Because war brings its own instabilities to a region which is already suffering. So what is the point that India will achieve?
And just to add to that, we have seen what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, right? Russia being the big power, it is perhaps thought that war will end in a few months, but it hasn't. It has gone on for years. And according to the last available figures, almost 158,000 people have died from both sides.
Yeah, the parallel is not there. Because Russia annexed Crimea, wanted to annex parts of the territory of Ukraine, which it had a significant Russian population and for which Russia claimed some degree of historical memory or historical records, and the fact that the Ukraine was joining the West as a NATO ally. So Russia faced a direct threat. And despite, in fact, the counter analogy is probably right, that Russia was not defeated, despite the whole West ganging up against Russia in that moment. Here, the point is, let me ask you this question. If I were to tell you that the cost of not doing something will be that every second day you'll be faced with acts like Pahalgam, and not just in Pahalgam, that in Anna Nagar in Chennai or wherever, or MG Road in Bangalore, you could not go out, your children will not feel safe. So would you rather live with that scenario where there's a sense of overwhelming fear of a bomb, a terror strike, and when you know that these are not, like in America, lone wolves carrying out random attacks just because they have access to guns and going and spraying bullets in a school, that these are instruments of a foreign policy, of a army, of a state which is in deep distress. Wouldn't you want to do something? Just because there don't seem to be easy options which I can describe and say, what can you do? Is assassinating of all the corps commanders going to help? I don't know. I mean, I remember once about 20 years ago, someone actually said, I'll tell you the solution to Pakistan, or the problem in Pakistan. He says, if the government of India were to allow me, I'd buy off all the, and this was actually someone who worked for a large business empire. He said, I'll buy off all the corps commanders with $100 million in a Swiss bank account, and Swiss bank accounts were safer than they are now, and ensure that their families are located in the best parts of Singapore, in Switzerland, with citizenships intact, and that will be the only way out. In other words, in diplomacy generally, it's carrots or sticks. You either buy, bribe, or you use sticks, or you use the seductiveness of your soft power. Like the Americans say, it was the whole idea of capitalism, democracy, which undermined the Soviet Union and led to the end of the Cold War. So either it is a seductive nature of your culture, your soft power, that will not work beyond a point. Bollywood will not be able to overwhelm Pakistan. Sticks and carrots are the only two options. Carrots for those in Pakistan who are sensible still, and sticks for those who have gone astray.
Professor Mattoo, if I can just come in. Yesterday, I was watching an interview which Nirupama had done with Mr. Ajay Saini, who's from the Institute of Conflict Management. Now, in that interview, he tells Nirupama that if you look at the numbers, that Pakistan has been sort of losing this war if you look at the whole situation as a war playing out for many, many years, Pakistan has been losing. Pakistan has been constantly losing. And so this kind of an attack, which is to grab eyeballs, like kill a number of people, like 26 people in one go, and grab eyeballs, is just a last act of desperation. And then should we react to that act of desperation with a war cry? He was asking this question also because if you look at the numbers from 2014 onwards, at least the last 2-3 years, we have seen the number of killings in Jammu and Kashmir, which is either of militants or of the forces or of civilians, have gone down in the last 1 or 2 years. And it was almost the same in 2012-13. So when Pakistan is seen, at least by Mr. Saini, as a country which has been on the losing side, should we then react this way?
See, the fact is that what is true is that there is very little appetite for violence in the Valley of Kashmir. There is virtually no fertile ground for Pakistan to operate within Kashmir. The number of Kashmiris who are joining the ranks of terrorists has trickled down to just a few. And the response and reaction, as you just saw, to incidents like this is to alienate the Kashmiris even further from Pakistan. If there was any affection for Pakistan, it dissipates once there are incidents like this. Now, true that these are acts of desperation. All I'm saying is, unlike Ajay Saini, I do not see in this a sunny side, because I think these acts of desperation require such little effort. You just train a few people with enough ammunition and send them across, and they can run havoc. So this level of desperation can continue for months and years unless it is targeted. You will not have a mass protest movement, or you will not have a mass rebellion, or you will not have large support for terrorism. And that I'm sure, not within Kashmir. This is not the Kashmir of the 90s or the 2000s even. It's the Kashmir of 225 is completely different in terms of sentiment, especially in terms of violence and terrorism. But all I'm saying is that, as Kennedy used to say, if there's someone desperate enough who is ready to give up his own life, no president of the United States can be completely safe. So similarly, unless you do something, these acts of desperation will continue for the foreseeable future, as long as the Pakistani army needs this order of an anti-India identity to survive.
By making it such an imperative, by making a response such a dire need of the moment right now, we must respond to this. We have to do something to deter the Pakistan army. Everybody recognizes, I think, now that the Pakistan army is capable of fighting only through proxies, such as these militants or terrorists in Kashmir. And the fact that every time that there has been an attack like this and that you have to respond means that you have actually handed over the initiative to the people who want you to make that aggressive move against Pakistan for whatever reason. Okay, and you are no longer now in control. You've handed over the keys of your strategic imperatives to a bunch of guys who come and kill people. And of course, you can argue that they have been sent by the establishment in Pakistan, the army in Pakistan, to do this. But every time they have done this, you have jumped up and said, I have carried out a response. I'm going to carry out a response. So your actions are being determined by these people. It's a trap. I think we have to also think about how we can get out of this trap. And of course, you and Dhanya or Pooja asked this question about how do we actually deter them forever. I don't think there's an answer to that. I don't think there is a strong enough response that India can think of that will deter them forever, short of what people are demanding. Let's obliterate Pakistan. I don't think that's possible. And I mean, that's wild. But what is a guarantee that you carry out some action today and another Baisaran does not happen in a couple of years? And then you will be demanding another, punishment so high that Pakistan will never do it again. What is the end to this?
Nirupama, Baisaran has never happened. This is unprecedented. So to say that this is part of a pattern, Pulwama was a army convoy. Uri was a cantonment. You've had massacres of indigenous populations, the Sikhs in Chhattisgarh, Kashmiri Pandits and Mandhama, or the Al-Faran kidnapping foreign tourists from Adu. But you've never had 26 tourists from all over India being attacked, singled out as Hindus, the men being separated, and then sprayed with bullets. This has never happened. This is unprecedented. Secondly, it's not a guarantee that this will not, that there will not be an incident like this. But if you do not respond, you will be sending the signal that India does not have the capacity, the will, or indeed the spirit to fight back. Was there this thought in anyone's mind that the President Bush should not have attacked Afghanistan after 9/11? Was there anyone who doubted the fact that you needed that attack, even though they never got Osama bin Laden? or that the Al-Qaeda leadership escaped during the attack and the occupation of Afghanistan, and finally found him as you to further evidence of Pakistan's heinous duplicity in Abbottabad, Osama bin Laden. Why do these doubts come to us at these moments of huge, grave tragedy? The fact is that every state of India, I'm not sure about Chennai, but at least the people who have read the list of people, Kerala, Karnataka, Andhra, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Bengal, Bihar, every state of India, the tourists from. You're destroying the whole idea that Kashmir was a sacred space for tourism. These are middle-class budget tourists who travel there. I'm feeling outraged also because in some ways, Nirupama, you're a dear friend of mine, so I don't want to feel outraged by you. But the way in which you are caricaturing the argument that obliterating Pakistan, no one is asking to obliterate Pakistan except some loonies on the social media. What we are saying is Pakistan has to pay a cost, or the Pakistani army, more properly, has to pay a cost for it. And I know you are sensible enough to make that distinction, but unfortunately the medium is such that you need to telegraph your arguments in a fashion that these divisions often get.
I think there was no confusion of what Nirupama was saying. She was rhetorically asking that what is a next step, what is the next step which would satisfy everyone. But I mean, there are a couple of points that we can disagree on here, Professor, including that did people have doubts whether US should have occupied Afghanistan? Yes. I mean, in retrospect, definitely yes. But I just want to quickly go to one final point to both of you. You were saying that this is not the Kashmir of the 1990s or the 2000s, where there was a lot of support for terrorism. Kashmir has changed. But I do not know if the opinion that people across India has changed about Kashmiris. Because immediately after the Pahalgam attacks, we are seeing a series of attacks on Kashmiris across India. We have seen
terrible.
that. Yeah.
That's outrageous.
Nirupama, and also I'll come to you first. I'm also seeing these people who are quite powerful in circles, let's say that this is the reason why NRC should be brought back. Right? There are so many parallel discussions happening. There was a interview put out by ANI of a Pakistani man who said that I have been living in India for 17 years. I even voted here. So now there's a discussion about why NRC should be there. So there's so much of hatred being poured out, but I want to focus on the fact that Kashmiris are being attacked across India, especially students are being targeted.
Yeah, I'll answer that. But before that, I want to respond to what Professor Mattoo said. We have doubts about what's going to happen because we are thinking people. That's one. And the second thing is that, to say that Kashmir, this has never happened before in Kashmir. Kashmir is a sacred space where tourists have never been attacked. There may have been one or two incidents. That is actually a policy failure. It is a failure to understand that your adversary, your enemy, has changed beyond imagination. That is where there is an intelligence failure. That is where there's a policy failure. You did not anticipate. You failed to anticipate that your enemy could come and do this to you in Kashmir. And I think that we are not talking about enough. We are talking about Pakistan a lot, but we are not questioning how nobody anticipated 3,000 people in this Switzerland of Pahalgam or whatever, Switzerland of Kashmir, and people are gathering there. It's not accessible, and nobody thought that there would be an attack there. Why? Why not? You have these guys who don't care about whether they're attacking tourists or non-tourists or Kashmiri Pandits or Hindus from anywhere in the country. Why was this such a sacred space? But the other thing that you talked about Kashmiris being attacked, I think it's such a paradox that the leadership talks about how Kashmir has become now a part of India after the dilution of 370 and after the removal of the special status. But increasingly, it is after this action in 2019 that Kashmiris have felt more unsafe across the country. You saw this happening in 2019, that parents of children who were studying in universities and institutes across the country said, just come back. You don't need to be in any of these colleges. You can study here. Just come back. So thousands of kids went back. And the same situation has obtained today after so many years. 2019 was 2019, but today is 2025. And even today, after all these years of sending tourists there and of them interacting with Kashmiris and everything, all that, the great spirit of normalcy in Kashmir, you have people then attacking Kashmiri kids across the country for something that your government is blaming Pakistan for. How does Kashmir get conflated? In your own eyes, you're conflating Kashmir with Pakistan, whereas your government has said that Kashmir is now part of India. Why is this happening? This is because of the bigotry and prejudice towards Muslims. If all of Kashmir had been Hindu, this would not have happened. But this is because most Kashmiris are Muslims. And this is just that because they are Muslims, you are conflating them, the people of Kashmir, with Pakistan and attacking them.
On Nirupama's earlier point of government failing to prevent Baisaran, we saw the remarks of Home Minister amongst other people that they didn't know it was going to be opened, and it was opened without permission. And we've done a story on the News Minute. The link is in the description. You can read how people for many years were visiting round the year, and it was an open secret that it is open. So it is clearly a question. And I asked somebody close to the government of this, and this is what the person said, that the government somewhere got caught up in its own propaganda that everything is normal in Kashmir, failed to recognize that, underneath that entire piece that we're talking about and normalcy, there is something simmering, and that will just not go away, with the slogans and these catchphrases.
The zero terrorism remark, right?
Absolutely.
These are the problems. It's all about theatrics also, which then puts you in trouble.
I agree. Just to tell you that we are friends in real life, Nirupama and me, so I agree with her completely on the last 2 points. I think it is a huge intelligence failure, not being able to anticipate this. Baisaran requires no permission. It was never closed to the public. I agree with you there also. And I think the attack on Kashmiri students is unpardonable, or on Kashmiris generally, or attacks on sellers in Missouri, which the one newspaper covered. The worst thing that you can do, worst thing in terms of winning the hearts and minds of the Kashmiris, as you keep saying, that's the worst thing you can do. So I entirely agree with whatever Nirupama expressed in the last few minutes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mattoo.
I hope that reaffirms our friendship.
So we have established peace in the studio. We have established peace
in the Bangalore Valley studio, at least.
Yeah, in the Bengaluru Valley studio, we have established peace. Thank you very much, Professor Mattoo.
Thank you so much.
As I said in the beginning, on May 2nd, when this episode airs, by then the RSF World Press Freedom Index would be out. The results of it were, of course, given as an embargoed press release, which is why we are aware of the numbers as we record on the 30th of April. India, which was at 159 in the World Press Freedom Index last year, which is 2024, has now done a little bit better. It's now at position 151. So that's what we are going to discuss today about press freedom, about the index. Has India really done better? There are a couple of countries which have now below India, which is Bhutan, Tajikistan, Yemen, Pakistan, Turkey, Venezuela, Cambodia, and Palestine. These were countries which had done better last year, but they've obviously come down. So about India, mainly what RSF has been raising is the economic independence of media outlets, that how independent really is the media in India, considering the fact that a lot of media houses are owned by either corporate houses, which is businessmen, or by politicians. So when media does not have the freedom to be impartial, to be independent, then the slide down happens. Last time, of course, RSF had said that Indian media is in an undeclared mode of emergency. We'll first go to Nirupama. Nirupama, did you see the RSF World Index, and what are your first thoughts about it?
my first thoughts about that index is that we continue to be in the last last 1/3 of that list. There are 180 countries and we are 151. And as you mentioned, it's an improvement, but that is a notional thing. There's that number from 157, was it, or 159 last year to 151. 159 is a notional thing because many other countries have now slipped under us. But we continue to be in that red, that deep red section of the map and of the list. And there are countries that are doing very much better than us. I mean, there are countries like Sri Lanka, which is above us. There is even in South Asia, Nepal is doing very well. So it's kind of sad that India, which is the which fancies itself as the largest democracy in the whole world, and at one point was a beacon of democracy to this region, in a sense, is now finding itself in this really deep red section of the index. And it's very troubling to me as a journalist, but I'm also not surprised or not taken aback by the fact that this has happened, because this is a continuing trend for many years now. And we have anticipated worse, and we continue to anticipate that things will worsen.
Do you think that things can worsen?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I think things can worsen. And, the problem is that these numbers don't quite quantify what we go through every single day as journalists. I'll give you one example. One of the news channels I was working with in the past failed to take up a massive scam. This is that Nirav Modi scam for many days, because Punjab National Bank, which was embroiled in the controversy in the scam, was one of the prime sponsors of our primetime show at the time. So it took like almost 7 days for the contract to get over, redraw the contract for that channel to take up the issue. If people think it's a simple thing, media ownership or even advertisement does not impact editorial decisions. This is one example I can give you from what I have seen through my own experiences.
There was a similar example that I heard when I was on a panel 2 weeks back, where a major leading publication representative was there and was saying that it's not all that bad about media ownership, because somebody in her newsroom was invited to be to cover the Swachh Abhiyan, the toilet making project, and then by the government they were all taken on a press junket, I guess, and then she came back and she said, oh, this was really bad. What she saw on the ground didn't at all add up, and so she said, I refuse to do it. Positive story on it, and the person who was narrating this just told the audience that that she was able to say that in a newsroom says that there is freedom. But I was shocked and surprised that is how low the standard is, because she didn't go on to write about how bad the program is on the ground, but rather, even going on that press junket, she just refused to write a positive story about the government, and that was being lauded at some extraordinary bravery. So that is how what we can cover is being viewed. But let's go to some of these numbers and look at them again, Dhanya. In the Asia Pacific region, 20 out of 32 countries have seen a drop in their economic press freedom score, and I think India is also positioned there. Sort of comes from this idea that where authoritarian regimes and democracies have to exert increasing control over media, this is the kind of chokehold that the editorials function through, and that is where our stories are not being able to be told. Mostly that needs to be said at these times. So also an interesting recent Pew Research survey that has come out, and 80% of Indians think that Indian media is free of government control. I was just surprised when I saw this, and I was just wondering like who these people were when there's an overwhelming 80% who's saying, and 43% of them said that it's important for the media. It's very important for the media to report without state censorship, but only a quarter of that thought it's somewhat important for them to, without state censorship. So Indians themselves have doesn't think much about how state censorship acts on media. But I'm still doubting on the methodologies adopted here, because I'm just wondering how people overwhelmingly can decide that, the media censorship or some kind of control isn't bad for media to function. So I'm just wondering the overall methodologies here.
Can I jump in here? I have a theory about this. Why people don't mind censorship, don't seem to mind censorship, or seem to think that it is necessary. See, I've worked for now since the late 80s, and I think the 80s were really the golden age of India's journalism. That's when if you entered journalism at that point, you were free to question anybody. I remember that Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister, and everybody from the youngest reporter to the most senior person in the bureau could write stories that would actually show him down. That would make fun of him. That would, for example, say how many times he would use the word hum dekhna hai, hum dekhenge in a speech. It would mock him for using English. So very many things. You had absolute freedom to take a go at the prime minister. That was the 80s. And this was because of the emergency that proceeded in the previous decade, right? And the Indian media then got a shock, woke up and said, no, we can't just sit back and, sink pains to the government. We have to question the government all the time. And this was, of course, a Congress government. But I am beginning to feel that we were actually used, we journalists were used by media owners, newspaper barons, to demolish the Congress government and bring in place what we have now. Okay, it took a time lag of about 20 years, but it's here. And now the people in power say, well, you have the government, you have the government you want. So what are you questioning this government for? This is the government that you have been waiting for, that you fought all this time for. So now you don't need to question it. You don't need Modi to have a press conference. He's doing everything for you. This is a good government. This is your government. This is my theory.
I'm not trying to be put a dampener of the party. We have improved now. One reason, like you said, could be because other countries have performed worse. But, the issue is that there is so much of self-censorship that you don't even need to use violence against journalists anymore. It is because of compliance, right? So when you've already bought the owners and you've already bought their loyalty, you don't need to show that you're putting pressure on media. So it does look like it's improved, but has it really? That's the question.
So if you look at the other countries, for example, Cambodia is now below India. The reason, I think it's because after Donald Trump came to power, and just before that also, there were a lot of issues with the Cambodian media. The Radio Free Asia had to shut down because Trump had given executive order finishing that funding. Pakistan, always in the news now, more in the news now, is also doing worse than India. Pakistan, in fact, had killings of 12 journalists last year, which was pretty bad. One of the final was Malik Zafar Naik, who was shot dead by gunmen when he was delivering newspapers. So Pakistan has had a chilling effect on all the other on its journalists. Then, of course, as usual, China, Vietnam, and a lot of these communist countries are in the very bottom because they have media which is completely owned by the state. Nobody else is supposed to report. And China has an insane number of journalists who have been detained. In fact, I think China has 113 journalists detained as of today. They use surveillance, they use coercion, intimidation, and harassment. And talking about surveillance, just yesterday, the Supreme Court has said that using Pegasus, the spice surveillance, is fine because sometimes there are people who are working against the interests of the nation. So you have to use Pegasus. It only matters as to who is being targeted. Now, I want to ask the Supreme Court, are you going to keep a tab of who Pegasus used against. You can use it against anyone tomorrow and say they're a threat to national security. Nirupama, you saw what the Supreme Court said.
Yeah, and what is anti-national here? I mean, how do you define anti-national? Because we have seen over the last 10 years that anti-national has become conflated with anti-government. So if you speak anything against the government, you're anti-national. And that is a huge problem. In fact, this is unacceptable that, you know, someone so eminent as a Supreme Court judge can say that surveillance is okay because some people may be working against the interests of the government. Unless you have very strict rules about who it can be used against, I think it is not, such surveillance techniques can only erode democracy, they can only erode media freedom, and you can pick up anybody. I mean, for instance, in Kashmir, now, you know, I'm bringing up Kashmir because of the Pahalgam thing, but look at that place since Article 370 was diluted and its special status removed. Local journalism was completely destroyed because every second person was seen as an anti-national. And there was such a chilling effect that people just moved to other occupations. They said, well, there's nothing to do here, nothing we can write that is not going to attract the notice of the officials of officialdom. And the thing is, I spoke to somebody about this in Kashmir's bureaucracy, and he said, well, they are dependent on ads from the government, and we give them ads. Their whole business runs on our ads, and they write against us. They write against India. They write against the Indian Constitution. That we won't allow. That cannot be tolerated. We will shut down newspapers. We will shut down journalists who do this. There's no mercy now. So that's, of course, Kashmir, you're talking about a place with conflict ridden and all, but that same economic model is prevalent across the country. That can be used to turn off the tap, pressurize you to do what the powers that be want you to do. And then everybody is flapping about saying the ads have stopped. And,
No, in fact, Kashmir, I think we as in the Indian media, I think has not turned its attention on how the Kashmir press was killed systematically by this government. For so many years, Kashmiri media has been crying out saying that we are not able to write, we are not able to report, people are being jailed, detained, just disappearing overnight. And recently, my colleague from Newslaundry, Manisha Pandey, she had gone to Kashmir for the elections, and she did this very nice video story on how the Kashmiri media has been silenced. And for that, there was a journalist who filed a complaint against Manisha and I with the INB ministry, with their grievance system, saying that here is a story, please apply sedition. And sedition is being used a lot even now.
But just to that point, at least in Kashmir, I think people can see, and that story by Manisha did point that, people are able to see that their press is no longer free. But the rest of the country, people think, or they are happy with the illusion that the media is still free. Journalists are assuming, they think that they're free while they're self-censoring. And that to me is a far more worrying trend that we're seeing, right? Journalists, and on that note, you mentioned Mukesh Ambani owned news outlets. I know for a fact that one of the news outlets that he owns has an unofficial list of companies owned by Ambani that you cannot report negatively on, and another list of companies owned by his business rivals that you're kind of pushed to report negatively on. So how do you believe anything that comes out of, news outlets owned by businessmen with vested interests, right?
And I think that media freedom is really in jeopardy now after the Pahalgam terror attack. Now, we have seen a slew of cases being filed against people. Many of them are not technically journalists, but I think it is definitely a blow on the freedom of expression. We have seen cases on, YouTubers like Medusa. She calls herself Medusa.
Her name is Dr. Madhuri Kakoti.
Then
We've
there is-
seen folk singer Neha Singh Rathod. She's been booked. And Ranting Golana, the YouTuber, her name is Shamita Yadav. She too has been booked with sedition.
And the YouTube channel called 4 PM has been shut down. I think it had almost 2 million viewers. And all these people, mind you, were doing videos or songs or whatever it is, just questioning the security at Pahalgam. They were asking, was there an intelligence failure? Was there a security failure? There is not, but all of them have been booked under the new sedition law in
There's no
BNS.
sedition law now.
But it is sedition law.
It is by another name. Yeah.
Yeah, it's section 152 of the BNS, which is basically sedition law in a new dress. You know, my only doubt about this whole RSF World Press Freedom Index, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are, all of you, but I felt that India is a country with a large amount of media, right? Like you take any other country, like Nirupama was saying, Nepal or Bhutan, these are small countries with very less media houses. But we have tens and thousands of media houses. So I have always felt that for the amount of media that we have, we do not have as many detentions or deaths and things like that. So perhaps in some way, the World Freedom Index is also not very fair to us, is one thought that I've always had.
I agree with you. And in fact, I was, just before this, we had a conversation that I can't wrap my head around the fact that countries like Rwanda have done better than India. I refuse to believe that. No matter how grave the situation in India continues to be, I don't think we are as bad. There is still a large section of media, especially regional media, that people don't always talk about enough, that pushes back at great risk every single day, and that isn't taken into account enough, I feel.
Yeah, but that regional media is also facing trouble now because many state governments are now filing cases, jailing journalists, taking their mobile phones. Leena, you want to say something?
No, I was also saying that we are not looking at the media ownership too, right? How all the big media houses are owned by what we call the jute press, the press that has these big businessmen who had been running these businesses for generations now, and how they all like to bow down to the new powers that be. And earlier too, India's press and India's movies too, if you look at it, the history of it, they were part of sort of the nation building process that was post-independence that was happening in India, and they were all willfully have signed up. So that kind of give and take with the political powers has always been there, and I think it's just gone into a certain kind of a comfort zone with not taking any attention. Like Josie Joseph, investigative journalist in India, used to, if you're a journalist in India, he keeps saying that there's more chance of you being killed in a road accident than you being killed while doing your duty as a journalist. It's very, very minuscule of journalists still who's getting killed on duty, but it is the fear that some ways your job security, the kind of funding that is growing into your media. And that's why I think, Dhanya and Pooja, the point you both keep making, how to independent media is very crucial for the survival of a democracy, and how your subscriptions is very crucial for the survival of an independent media too, right?
Just a last point on that, Dhanya. When I talk to people, they don't dispute the fact there is corruption in government contracts. So, when I talk about takeover of NDTV by Adani Group and how it killed the last whatever of pluralism in media, they say, okay, we don't dispute that, yes, all big businessmen have to give bribes and, have to do favors for the government for government contracts. They refuse to understand that it trickles down when he buys a channel. That last link, somehow people are not able to understand.
Yeah, I just want to say that, people now question the role of a journalist. Why are you here? What is your job? What do you actually do? All you want to do is criticize the government? You should be more constructive. You should do positive stories. I think people have ceased to have an understanding of what journalism is.
I think we keep talking about, in the light of these indexes, a very bleak picture of Indian media. But let me sidetrack a bit. And I think that currently there is much hope in media that I see, because in 2022, when the Oxfam report came, 90% of leadership positions were never open to upper caste people. Now what you see is that there are journalists who are opening up their own channels or podcasts or to talk about these issues, right? Whereas in the past, when we needed a Dalit murder or some Dalit atrocity, it never made it to the front page for a long time in the past. And then slowly that independent voices that are being raised on a big thing is the social media platforms too allowed for those voices to come out. But that has reflected slowly into what is happening in the newsroom. There are more diversity hires. At least there is an inner alert that some editors at least very consciously do of Me Too and what followed for gender and what is happening with Dalit Ambedkarite voices in India. And all those things are getting platformed also because independent media and people who are able to start their own channels and voice that are also able to do in the current ecosystem. And I think that is somehow what has laid the ground for that is people's disbelief in the mainstream media and how it was talking about the issues. So that has helped in some way India's media, I believe.
Okay, so anyways, we are the optimistic people.
Leena once again is in charge of the morale of the room and finds a silver lining.
I also go to every college and I tell them that, if you go to a journalism conference, why would any student want to be a journalist? Because we're only talking about murders and detentions and surveillance and all that. But I also tell them there's no other job that I would do. This is not a passion or just a job. It's a calling, right? That's why most of us are here in journalism. And this is the best time to be a journalist. I just want to say one thing from what Nirupama said. 2 questions which really, really irritate me is, one, people ask, oh, today's a festival, is it a holiday for you? One. Second is when people ask me, why don't you report some good news? Please tell me what are the best sarcastic replies that I can give to these 2 questions. Write to me at southcentral@thenewsminute.com.
Okay, my book recommendation is this one. I'll show it. Bhima Koregaon, Challenging Caste, Brahmanism's Wrath Against Dreamers of Equality by Ajaz Ashraf. I've just finished reading this book. It's a page turner. It's about the Elgar Parishad and the Bhima Koregaon violence that took place in 2018, on January 1st, 2018, for which 16 people were arrested as part. It was alleged that they were part of this Maoist plot to overthrow the government, and I think 11 people have so far been released, and 1 person died in jail. Father stands for me. But what Ajaz Ashraf has done really is a very forensic examination of what the government claimed, of the link between Elgar Parishad and Bhima Koregaon, of the charge sheets, of how the violence actually started at Bhima Koregaon. I'm telling you, this is unputdownable after a bit. I mean, it picks up. It goes a little slowly to begin with, but it really picks up. And he goes into there's a village here, which is where Sambhaji, the son of Chhatrapati Shivaji, his final rites took place, and there's a memorial to him there. And he talks about the tensions in that village just 2 days before the events at Bhima Koregaon, and how they contributed to Bhima Koregaon.
Now, Nirupama has made a very sensible recommendation, almost an academic book. So as an academic, I would like to make a recommendation of a book which is completely unacademic. And as a teacher, I would like to make that recommendation on reasons why you should and should not write a book. So this is a book that I'm going to flag, which is A.S. Dulat's The Chief Minister and the Spy, published by Juggernaut, with a foreword by M.K. Narayanan, NSA and DIB. So the reason why you should write a book like this is because it'll earn you lots of money. It's full of gossip. It's full of interesting anecdotes, and lots of people will want to read it, especially since it'll create a stir in the media for all the wrong reasons about what Farooq Abdullah, whose general view on consistency is not particularly enviable. But That's the reason why I would write a book like this. If I was short of money, if I had the skills, if I had access to a research assistant or a good AI tool, I'd write this book, earn a lot of money, and then perhaps retire. All the reasons why you should write this book is because it's an unlikely friendship. It's a friendship which should never happen between an intelligence officer and his prime. So, and if you have read all the Le Carre novels, you'll know that the worst mistake a case officer can do is become friendly or almost fall in love with his prime asset. You'll never want to share that asset. You'll never want to transfer that asset. You'll remain devoted to that asset. So that's the reason why this book should not have been written, because if this has happened on a sensitive subject like Kashmir, then Mr. Dullat was clearly one of the worst intelligence case officers. And if an academic becomes in a similar position where his primary interlocutor, his respondent, he falls in love with, that's the reason why you should never write the book, because in academia calls for objectivity, balance, and scholarship, which this book is not about. Thank you so much.
I just want to add that Mr. Dullat has written several books, and most of these books do talk about Farooq Abdullah. In fact, I interviewed him about his last book at the Kerala Literature Festival, and one more book has come out now. He's in Bengaluru for that book release. Yes.
One last thing which I want to add, if I can, is that like Nirupama, who I have fearlessly criticized when I disagree with, Dullat Saab is also a dear friend of mine who I hope will take my criticisms of him in the right spirit, like Nirupama has done on the occasion. And he's a very generous, very expansive human being. He and his wife are dear friends.
Okay, so hopefully I'll send this clipping to Mr. Dullat. Yeah, everybody's a dear friend, but let's criticize them. Okay, my recommendations this week are very simple. It's The Red-Haired Woman by Orhan Pamuk, and I'm going to actually give a movie recommendation. I never do that. Please watch the movie called Flow. It's about a small black cat. I have a black cat myself. It's a really nice movie, 1.5 hours, Oscar winning. Have you watched it?
No.
See, she never watches the good stuff. Yes.
You know, I have given, I don't know how many recommendations to watch in this episode.
What is
You
your
have not watched
recommendation?
any. But this episode, I'm recommending Josie Joseph's book. I think it's timely and it somehow combines the two topics that we have discussed today. The Silent Coup is the book I recommend today.
Leena?
Okay, my two quick recommendations is HT today published a photo series from the Attari border of people saying goodbye, family members who belong to India and Pakistan. It's a really good photo series. That is one of my recommendation. The real cost of the war, some of those people out there. And Newslaundry, Manisha Pandey has done a video of just showing us the clips of what Arnab Goswami was doing in his studio when Balakot happened. So I thought that was a very interesting video, and that is
Why
my
would
second.
you recommend that?
It's
No,
really
Manisha's
interesting.
video, not
Yeah,
Arnab
I'm
Goswami.
saying, but still.
Yeah.
They did a great job at combining and reminding us what TV studios do.
Okay, so today it was a considerably longer South Central. We will read out letters next week, I promise. So write to us at southcentral@thenewsminute.com. I already did have a couple of letters, but I think since the episode has turned out to be this long, I'll refrain from reading those. Thank you for watching, listening, etc. So just 25 editions. We are not that young, but still young. So do recommend the show to people, to friends, family, your colleagues, to send the link. And remember, it is going to be World Press Freedom Day. Do your bit. Let's all not just complain about the state of media. Let's help those media houses which we like. And for you, if that's the News Minute, then do become a subscriber. Thank you to my producer, Bhuvan. Thank you, Ajay, our editor, Jasim Ali, and Maria Teresa Raju, who listens into every episode and writes down what has to go on our social media.